My name is Leann. I'm a game designer and I'm a woman. There is a reason I include both of those things in my introduction. When you imagine a game designer, who do you think of? I'm willing to bet most of you aren't thinking of a woman. And I don't blame you. After all, that's what society expects a game designer to look like. I googled it and here's what Google thinks a game designer looks like. Granted, you don't have to scroll far to find a female game designer. Here's the first one I found. Except, something still seems off, doesn't it? How come the female designer has a man standing over her evaluating her work? Even when I specifically search female game designer, I still get images like these. In all fairness, the games industry is male-dominated, and trust me, we'll be getting into that soon enough. But if most people making games are men, it makes sense that that's who you imagine when you think of a game designer. But what about a player? We know for a fact that the ratio of men to women who play games is a lot more even. According to Statista.com, in 2019, 54% of gamers in the US were male, while 46% were female. So then, what do you imagine when you think of a gamer? Because this is what Google thinks. Starting to see a trend? Again, it's a bunch of men, and even if there is a woman featured, somehow a man is still involved. So if the demographic is so much more even, how come the perception of a game player is still overwhelmingly male? That's what I'm trying to find out. Why is the games industry perceived as more male-dominated, both from a production and consumer standpoint, and how does the alienation of other demographics affect it? When I decided I wanted to make games for a living, I started looking into different colleges and universities that offered game design and development courses. I even got to visit a few. Full Sail, Columbia College, DePaul University. And when I was touring these schools, I realized that the majority of the other prospective game design students were male. But I didn't read into it. I had those rose-colored glasses of graduating high school and moving away and growing up and starting the next chapter of my life. So I accepted Sheridan as my college, I paid my school fees, I got a student visa, and I came to Canada. And when I entered the room for my very first class, there were 4 other girls in the room. That's right. My first year at a new school, in a new country, where I knew nobody, and there were a total of 5 girls in my section, myself included. Of course, there are more than 5 women in my whole year group, but there's no reason a class of 25 students should have only 5 women. It's been 3.5 years since then. In that time, I've had multiple professors talk about how male-dominated the industry is and how women rarely ever make it to a position of leadership. I've gone to conferences where women give talks about how marginalized they are in this community. I've gone to games events in dark bars and continue to be one of the only women in the room. I've heard a past student talk about being followed home by a male coworker because she dared to invite him for coffee as colleagues. I've listened to female classmates ask not about how to get hired or how to improve their skills, but how to stay safe in a work environment. Why do these things happen? I'm months away from graduating and entering the working world, and it's genuinely terrifying to think about what that means for me as a woman in games. So yeah. I don't think it's unreasonable that I want to look more into this male-dominated culture around games, its origins, and how to change it. In all fairness, it's not exclusively the game industry that's responsible for the lack of female representation within it. In general, there's a societal belief that women aren't suited for jobs in STEM fields. In any technology-related field, it's likely to be male-dominated. And it's exactly this belief that women don't do technology that men in power need to prevent women from being hired, promoted, or given positions of responsibility within these fields. For generations, games have been directly marketed towards young men. This creates the idea that games are a boys' club, and when women try to enter this club, it's not uncommon for them to be met with backlash, abuse, and harassment from the male gaming community. Despite this abuse, these players are rarely adequately punished by game publishers for their actions, which leads them to believe that it's okay, and the cycle continues. Gamergate happened from 2013 to 2015. The toxic gamers making threats and doxing women faced no consequences. It's honestly alarming the number of accounts I've seen of women going to gaming events to give a talk or showcase their game, only for it to be assumed that they're in the wrong place. There's a whole Twitter thread about women just sharing that experience, starting with this tweet. So this super aux thing happened to me yesterday at official GDC registration. As I approached the line for speaker badge pickup, a security guard stopped me and asked where I was going. I pointed to the speaker registration booth ahead. He said, "That's for speakers." I said, "Yes, I know," and proceeded to get in line. A few seconds later, a different security person came up to me and asked if I was a speaker. I said yes. She walked away. Then a third did when I got to the top of the line. I didn't see security asking the white men in line if they were speakers. I asked the guard if he also asked the guy in line behind me if he was a speaker. He vaguely announced that it was the speaker line. Yes, I know I'm in the speaker line because I'm a speaker. This inspired other women to share their stories, such as, "We had this happen to us too. 5 women of color tried to pick up badges early, were stopped at the door and held up for 5 minutes because the guy didn't accept that we were there to pick up our badges. In the end, we couldn't pick them up early because they had closed." Now that you mention it, this has happened to me as well. I also noticed they barked the same question to a black game dev and other women. What the hell? Happened to me as well when I was walking to participant registration. Another designer and classmate shared the story of going to GDC with a group of other women, going to get a free cupcake, and having the person giving out the cupcakes make a joke about their diet. Let's play Appropriate or Not Today at the GDC 19 Expo floor. Group of 4 women walk up to you to grab your free cupcakes. Tell them the cupcakes are perfect for them because they're 0 calories and made with kale as a joke. Yet another designer pointed out how common it is for game textbooks to assume that players and designers are alike, are male, and refer to them as he, him. Is it really so hard to just use gender-neutral pronouns like they? How would that affect the quality of learning at all, other than, making new developers feel like more than just men are welcome? On the topic of student designers and developers, I really can't stress enough that our professional careers start here. Things we learn throughout this program are going to follow us throughout our entire careers, which is why it's so incredibly important to point out inappropriate behavior to students when it occurs. I have had a male classmate on several occasions make sexual jokes in class, and yet teachers have done nothing about it. That's the exact kind of behavior that we need to stamp out right now before it becomes an acceptable norm. No, your voice does not make me or anyone else in this room wet, and now is not the time to ask. Maybe I'm just naive or idyllic, but I truly don't think the majority of males in the games industry are intentionally malicious. I do think there are bad people out there, yes, but I think some people just genuinely don't realize when they're being inappropriate, or others might be fine people themselves and just not realize the injustices that female designers face and are content to keep things the way they are. The good news is we're making progress. At least there are women in the games industry at all, right? There are studios, usually small or indie, that are exclusively made up of women. There are studios that do have decent advantages and/or policies in place that support and protect women. The bad news? It's still far from enough and progress is slow. It's hard to defeat an institution that intentionally makes it harder for women to have any power. As more women fight to enter the industry, things will change, but it's going to take more than just women fighting for our rights. Again.
Hi, everyone. This is Francesca, Curriculum Director with Code Coven, and I am here with Tara Mustapha, our lovely CEO.
Code Coven was founded in order to address the gender imbalance in the games industry, and we work year after year to move the needle and improve diversity across all disciplines and seniority levels.
Yeah, so something that I think we both noticed from watching Leann's talk is that she talks about this experience of being one of the very, very few non-men in a classroom setting in specifically games academia. And this is something that I have definitely experienced going through not only academia, but also within, community game spaces. And we talked a little bit about this earlier with mentorship, is being able to find communities that celebrate you and your skill set and help you kind of network.
It's something that is really close to my heart, because I think when I started Code Coven, it came from from sort of my own lens of identity and experience. So thinking back to, as Leann said, the ratio of non-men to women in her scenario. Early on in my career, I went and got a diploma, 2 diplomas in game design. And in each course, in each cohort, I was one of 2 women in a cohort of, 20 or so men or cis men. And to see that over 2 decades, which I hate admitting because that's the time that has passed, that has only gotten incrementally larger. And I know a lot of these places are churning out, in a way, class after class after class. And these ratios are still reflective of the industry.
Yeah, and I think a huge part of this also, specifically within academia, is a lot of the existing game development or game focused programs are born out of existing computer science departments, which already have such a history, right, of being male dominated for particular reasons, and staff tends to be cis men, and the students tend to be cis men. I think in my situation, I went specifically to a tech school for a game design program that was born out of a computer science program at a school that used to be an all men's school. So and I quickly realized also that a lot of the men who were taking the class, the students, they had already been given opportunities to learn about science and technology. Maybe in high school, they had taken computer science classes. So they were already starting a step ahead of me. So not only did I feel pressured about this gender imbalance and feeling like maybe I wasn't really supposed to be there, that feeling was increased exponentially because I was starting from zero, and people were not. Other people were not. And that can be so incredibly intimidating. And I think, not having someone tell you, hey, this is for you, you can do this, it's, I don't know, it was really difficult.
Yeah. I think I was really lucky in sort of my childhood to have grown up with, like, my dad was a super early adopter, and he was always tinkering with computers and code and things like that. And I would just shadow him. And he loved games and stuff. So it was natural for me. But I also remember, so when I was young, the 2 big names for me in games were seeing Roberta Williams's King's Quest and Jane Jensen and the Gabriel Knight series, for example. If I didn't have those 2 names, would I have known that this was a career path for me?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we talked about this earlier in the mentorship segment, but we talked about being able to see yourself in that position, right, or in that industry. And I think unless you're able to see kind of, role models or see yourself represented in that workforce, it never occurs to you that you could also be making games, or you could also be working in this industry.
I think it's exciting to see how we can make an impact, how we can create safer spaces, communities that have the same shared values, and who are really targeted to moving this needle and getting it to a really gender parity. it really comes down to empathy, don't you think? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when Leann was talking about safe spaces, it's creating those safe spaces and for you to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, which is something that games makes us do on a regular basis. And say, how do we create that safe environment? So encouraging people to outwardly say, I think this will, for me, this is a huge difference maker of saying, hi, my name is Tara. My pronouns are she, her. And that almost immediately tells somebody that you are aware of how there are different pronouns and different identities, and then getting involved in your communities or corporation places that you work in their D&I initiatives and holding each other accountable to how can we move this needle.
Yeah, for me, there's definitely that note, like as you were saying, like putting yourself in other people's shoes, but also just noticing the small differences and being, and this is something that I think takes a lot of training and practice, is being able to see beyond your own experience and see beyond your own perspective. And I think we can only do that to a certain extent, obviously, because I am who I am and I've experienced what I've experienced. But being able to know that my perspective and my understanding, or like my truth of something, might not be someone else's truth. I think every person is going to be a little bit different in how they are, right, in terms of their personality and their comfort level. But I think we also have to acknowledge that a large part of how we communicate is based on how we grew up, which a lot of that is tied to these like stereotypical gender roles. So, and I definitely feel like that's affected how I communicate, absolutely. And I think being able to understand not only where people are currently, but also where people might be coming from.
I think that's so critical, yeah. And especially I think when you find people who are aware of how they, like, that they are open to feedback. They might have gotten something wrong, but they're open to listening to how to change, adapt, consider somebody else is so critical. You know, with everything that we've done with Code Coven, we've also, because of the global, you know, we try and have a global reach, and taking in also what are cultural norms for specific genders or perceptions has been an interesting, and how do people communicate.
I think that was something that specifically came up during Elevate, where we had teams from all over the world, and we actually, I think we got into a discussion at one of our kind of like coffee talk socials about how different nationalities tend to communicate, and kind of talking specifically about how certain nationalities are known to communicate in a more blunt way. And that was something that naturally came up in conversation because we had these teams, you know, working together in the same space, and trying to figure out how to best communicate with each other. As a wrapping up thought, obviously we are all here in games because we love games and we love storytelling, and we believe that this is, you know, art that is worth creating and spending our time and our hearts and our energy and putting it all into that. And I have met so many incredible people and so many amazing communities within the game space. I don't want to at all negate that people who are non-men have had, you know, really atrocious experiences, but I also want to acknowledge that there are so many good people doing really fantastic things and working really hard to make the industry a better place for everyone.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think with that, we will go ahead and wrap up this segment. Please enjoy the rest of Modern Magicks. And if you would like to join our community and stay involved, you can always hop on over to the Discord and hang out with us. So we'll see you soon.